Yep. Today we're going to talk about Chinese air pollution caused by American consumption. Group members include myself, Connor, Taj, Bailey, Noah, and Alec. So what we mean is we're investigating how the products that are being made in China and being shipped to the United States, how is that creating all of their air pollution or contributing to all the air pollution in China. We're actually starting to see some of that pollution coming back across the Pacific and coming back to us. So we want to kind of investigate, did we as an American economic entity simply just actually get rid of air pollution, or did we simply just ship it to China and now it's coming back to bite us? Causes of the air pollution in China are, number one is rapid economic growth. Its economic growth in the past 3 decades has been the fastest among major nations, and it's our main factor of why China has extensive air pollution. Along with rapid economic growth, there's also rapid population growth. We've seen an exponential boom in population since the 1950s. I think the now global population is around 7.5 billion people, and a lot of that population is within China. Rapid population growth contributes to air pollution through people's more consumption of goods, people's waste, and everybody is wanting to get cars nowadays, so that greatly increases CO2 emissions. And then our third kind of ties into our economic growth. It's output from manufacturing, and as you'll see later in our presentation, the United States makes up a lot of the manufacturing that's going on within China. Some of the effects from air pollution is climate change. As these gases and air pollution build up, it creates the greenhouse gas effect, which then in turn raises the global temperatures, melting polar ice caps, and leads to a whole lot more of a mess. And then 2, just pollution in general. You're going to see a lot more hazy days in China with the extensive air conditions that they have. And then our third is health issues and possibly death. So as you can see from this map, the total energy consumption, the 2 top contributors are the United States and China. Us as a nation, we only make up 5% of the world's population, but we consume 24% of the world energies, and that's, again, second only to China.
Okay, so now I'll be talking about the economy of China. China does manufacturing for many foreign businesses. In 1990, it produced less than 3% of global manufacturing, but from 2013 to 2015, China was the world's largest exporter. China is still relatively a poor country in terms of its standards of living. So companies in China pay their workers less than American workers. That makes products cheaper, which lures overseas manufacturers to outsource jobs to China. So also the cost of building a manufacturing plant is cheaper in China, and they have fewer environmental laws, and its laws for controlling pollution are weaker. These are a few reasons why U.S. does a lot of business with China. So this slide shows the exports of China. So they mainly export electrical things like computers, broadcasting equipments, telephones, and yes, you can go to the next slide. China's exports. In 2015, China exported 19% of goods to the U.S., higher than any other country. So this slide shows like the destinations. U.S. was 19%, Hong Kong 12%, Japan was the third highest. And so American businesses ship raw materials to China. Factory workers build the final products and they ship them back to the U.S. So technically, China's exports are American products. Here's a video of how the air quality is affecting all of China's citizens.
So it might not seem like it, but it's the middle of the day here in Beijing. The air is so polluted that it's darkened the sky. Now, recent studies show that even breathing this kind of air for an hour can reduce a person's life expectancy by 20 minutes. It's akin to being a heavy smoker, smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes every day. So we wanted to know, how are people in this city coping with the bad air?
我就这几天避免出门儿，避免出门儿。
I'm trying to avoid going outside. My throat hurts. I think people should drive less and all the factories should be shut down.
I don't have a face mask. I am used to the bad air now because I always work on the streets. On days like this, it's very easy to fall ill. The smog definitely harms people's health.
I have to keep working to earn a living. I haven't bought any face masks. Pollution is a serious issue, but ordinary people like me have no say in how to deal with it.
That pessimism is widespread. Recent surveys show the majority of people in China's biggest cities have little faith the polluted air will improve in the next 5 years. Despite pledges coming out of the Paris conference, most believe the dirty air is here to stay. Celia Hatton, BBC News, Beijing.
Next, we're going to be talking about emissions in China. As we've seen, the China to U.S. export has trended upwards, which has resulted in an increased production in China and a linear increase with that in emissions. Air quality in China has worsened, as you can see this image on the lower left. This is Beijing on a nice, clean, sunny day when the wind pushes away a lot of the air pollution, and here on the right when it's all stagnant and visibility is really decreased. We also have seen over the western United States, concentrations of sulfate, ozone, and carbon monoxide have increased. A lot of what you're seeing here, because of the elevated transport of Chinese pollution, which is overcompensating for the effect of reduced pollution and emissions in the United States. So while it is out of sight, it shouldn't be out of our minds. This is an air quality index showing the airborne particulate matter. This is the numerical value there. Up here at the top, where we always want to try to be, globally is good to moderate, where air quality is satisfactory and poses no health problems. And as we get further down here into these scary colors, there is higher amounts of this airborne pollution, and it can lead to health problems with emergency conditions. Mostly what we're seeing is increased cardiorespiratory diseases. And based off of that index that we were just looking at, this is an aerial map of Beijing here. And as we move outward, you're seeing that there's nearly no area covered that is not unhealthy or shows some issues to sensitive groups and likely higher cardiorespiratory issues in these areas. This graph was taken, or the information that created this model was taken in 2015, starting from April 1st all the way to August 1st. While there is some fluctuation, you can see that almost nowhere is where you want to be.
So, as Bailey was showing in her slides, air pollution in China is at an all-time high. As you can see from her pictures in Beijing, you couldn't really see the city in certain parts. This pollution, however, affects more than just China. It also is affecting the United States. The United States is honestly greatly affected by it, as we receive a good chunk of these air pollutants. This is due to the wind currents known as the westerlies, which push the pollutants across the Pacific Ocean onto the west coast of the United States. In recent times, a study published in Nature Geoscience found that the movement of ozone pollution from China has offset nearly 43% of the US efforts to reduce ozone emissions. The government actually tried to reduce these ozone emissions by cutting the production of nitrogen oxide by 20%, which in essence should lead to a decrease of ozone. However, the decrease in ozone was not seen at all, and they believe it could be shown by this study right here. Another study also shows that pollution blown from China accounts for 12 to 24% of sulfate concentrations on the West Coast. And the same study, which is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that manufacturing exports contribute to 36% of the country's sulfur dioxide emissions, 27% of the country's nitrogen oxide emissions, 17% of black carbon emissions, as well as 22% of carbon monoxide emissions. This figure right here shows a simulated percentage change in 2006 of surface air pollution due to Chinese exports of goods to the United States. And as you can see, the sulfate is pretty bad. You can see a maximum of 7.2%. Ozone is a little bit less, but in more recent times, ozone has been offset in the United States by Chinese exports. Black carbon here and carbon monoxide. So the question we have is US getting what it deserves? China is the US's largest goods trading partner, and we import much of our goods from China. The US goods and services trade with China totaled an estimated $648.2 billion in 2016. We exported $169.3 billion to China, and we imported $478.9 billion from China. In other words, we fuel their manufacturing plants, and we contribute, we basically fuel a lot of the pollution that's made through these plants. And from these numbers, you can see that China is the largest supplier of goods for the United States. So the US is contributing to these air pollutants, and these natural winds are bringing them back. Next slide. And this figure kind of just gives a visual representation of US and China, how much they import and export. As you can see here, the US imports $2.9 trillion in goods, much of that from China. They also export 1.38 trillion goods, and those go to all over the world. And China exports $1.47 trillion and imports $1.16 trillion. So as you can see, China exports a lot of goods, and America imports a ton of them.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit on the future of manufacturing and emissions in China. And so manufacturing is not really expected to change. It's supposed to stay in China for the near future. So I'm going to more focus on the emissions as a result of actually increased manufacturing and how that's going to kind of affect the global warming in other countries. So even with their current emission cut programs, which they have like a lot of renewable plans for the future, they're still predicted to peak in coal production and usage by 2030 from what is currently just over 4 billion tons to almost 5 billion tons of coal. And just to give you an idea, the United States right now uses about, in 2015 they used 900 million, so almost a fifth of what China's using. And a lot of groups have in their presentations mentioned how China is really focusing on their renewables and is like leading and making their renewable programs bigger and better. But they're also increasing their production, and as a result, their total energy is also increasing. So while they are increasing the renewables, since they are overproducing and producing more and more, their coal production is actually rising with the renewables, so it's not even really offsetting it at all. It's just kind of increasing both. And then here's just another graph showing them. So just kind of ignore there's orange and blue, those are different countries, just kind of ignore those. We're not going to talk about those, but In red, you see China's total coal production, and here's in 2012, it's just over 4 billion tons. And then you can see, like I said earlier, in 2030, they get all the way up here. And then in 2040, they are predicted to decrease a little bit as their renewable technology kind of catches up. However, the decrease isn't nearly as significant as their increase in production. So even with the added renewables, they only predicted to go to about like 4.5 billion, which is still a huge amount of CO2 being put into the atmosphere. And these emissions are only going to hurt us in the future. So the global warming is already a huge issue now, and if China continues to go on this path that they're currently on, it's only going to make things worse for us and everyone else in the world. So an important question to ask is China the problem, or is the problem overproduction and overconsumption? Like, is it because we're overproducing, or is it because where we're producing? And the answer, well, we're going to go over like what I think the answer is. And first, we're going to just do a hypothetical. It's like, if manufacturing was brought back to America, would that help the world as a whole? And so first we can look at reduced emissions from transportation. So China obviously is the other end of the earth from America, and so transportation costs are great, and emissions from transportation is a huge chunk of the total global emissions. And so in 2007, China emitted 110.18 million tons of CO2 from exporting goods alone, and 39% of that was from air transports and 61% from seas, so like boats transporting to America. So the next question is, if we ignore like the extra from transportation CO2, if we just focus on, if we moved all the manufacturing to the United States and just focused on that aspect of it, would there be less total like CO2 emissions, and would the world be better off as a whole? And we can see that the United States, this is the United States' electricity generation by how they produce it. And so they have a 39% from coal, 27% from natural gas, and then I think around 32% from non-emitting sources, which includes nuclear and renewables. And China, on the other hand, is almost the opposite. They have 66% from coal, 20% from oil, and only 12 from non-emitting sources. And so if we were to take the manufacturing and move it to America, we would expect a huge CO2 drop, because as we learned in class, coal and oil have a much higher like per unit carbon release than does natural gas. And also the United States is using a lot less fossil fuels to supply their energy. So if we were to move the manufacturing to America, we would expect a huge drop in the global gas emissions, and that would leave the world off a better place for the future.
So to conclude, the global economy depends on exports and imports from both of these countries. Yes, air pollution in China is affected by American consumption. However, pollutants are being pushed from China across the Pacific to the US. So who's really losing?